In June this month, world leaders are descending on Japan for the G20 summit, but attention could quickly turn to how trade talks between China and the United States pan out. So what could a single meeting between the leaders of both countries do to the ongoing dispute? Let's take a closer look.
If President Xi doesn't come, will that mean that the tariffs on China for the additional $300 billion in goods go on immediately?
Yes, it would.
Expect more China tariffs was what US President Donald Trump told CNBC on June the 10th if President Xi Jinping is a no-show at the G20 meeting. Since then, both countries have confirmed there will be a meeting. But given the growing complications of the dispute so far, I think it has become far too complicated beyond just a single meeting. What I mean by that is, this dispute has become more than just a straight-up trade war between the world's two biggest economies. And to put it bluntly, this has become a war of future technologies, and with it, the global economy. Let's break down a typical Huawei smartphone, which I think sums up the status quo quite nicely. From the breakdown, you can see how different components from multiple countries create the final product. For example, a Financial Times research shows components like the microchip, which is the core computer inside a smartphone, is highly reliant on designs from US companies like Qualcomm. And although Huawei uses its own chip design unit called the HiSilicon, it still requires US-made software to make the designs. In addition to that, its core chip architecture is patented by ARM, a Japanese-owned British semiconductor firm, and its OLED screens partly rely on technology from South Korea. And last but not least, is powered by Google's Android operating system. This example, I think, magnifies how world economies are closely intertwined, and even more so in the case of China-United States relations. But this trade war is now increasingly chipping away at the interdependence, cross-border investments and supply chains that define today's global economy. So it is essentially hurting all of us, and irrespective of whose side you take, there are no winners. But wait, there is more. Given how fractured the relationship is becoming, there is a talk of the two countries decoupling. But what could this mean for all of us? Experts say if the US cuts off China from its technology, China will be more determined to build its own technological infrastructure from top to bottom, and that may have already started. Huawei is reportedly building its own alternative operating system called Hongmeng or Arc to Android. According to the Straits Times, Huawei's operating system is likely to be based on an open-sourced version of Android so that consumers can continue to use and access Android apps. Experts say although it might not overtake Android, Huawei of 2019 can certainly take on the challenge and possibly win in building its own ecosystem while protecting its position in China and other national markets. So whether we believe hands can be shook on a China-US deal or not at the G20, we might be seeing the start of a bipolar world of digital technology, with Chinese and American tech ecosystems side by side, and more could follow.
The United States loses with everybody.
But this still begs the question, what are President Trump's motives for this trade war in the first place? I think it's safe to say we're still confused about how should we interpret his fusion of economic issues with national security.
Buried deep inside the massive government data is a huge number that tells a very different story.
According to CNBC, there is a missing number in the trade war. It's called the US Foreign Affiliates Sales. It adds up the total sales of US companies in China and is not part of the trade data. As recently as 2016, US sales in China totaled $343 billion, and this almost wipes out the US's $378 billion of trade deficit with China in 2018, and this dwarfs the $35 billion China sells in the US. So this makes me think it might not be just about the trade deficit after all. Meanwhile, the G20 forum might be a good place to start if the two sides are to rebuild trust, because as things stand, the risks of failure are not too high. But ultimately, I feel we'll end up talking more about China's quest for tech independence than anything else in this trade war. I'm Josh, stay tuned with China Matters.